Good morning. Today I'm going to start reading my 2020 Action Criticism and Theory for Music Education article called An Environmental Philosophy for Music Education based on Satis Coleman's 1878 to 1961 writings on music and nature. So this is actually, I like to call this my third dissertation. I can't say if it was one. My first being my actual dissertation, Praxis for Music, Confident Music Improvising. My second one being my monograph, Eco-Literate Music Pedagogy. So the first one was a qualitative research study into confidence in music education for improvisers and how they cultivated their confidence. That was good work. But I'd already started my work on ecology, which is philosophical, and I published that book. And then I was already doing research into Satis Coleman, and had already published a small article in Music Educators Journal by then. And so I had this big, long work that I had continued doing, historical research. Went down a few times to D.C. to research in the National Archives for Music Education, right, at University of Maryland. And had a good amount of thing and a theory of how her philosophy was spiritual and environmental. But being such a long bit of work, right, I didn't think it would fit into the, the Journal of Historical Research in Music Education. So I decided to lean into the theory even more and publish it in an act. It worked out pretty well, I think. Okay, so here's the abstract. The 21st century has been defined by ecological crises, and these crises have been absent from most critical conversations in music teaching and learning. Satis Coleman's music education writings, influential in the 1920s and 30s, focused on music and nature. The intellectual history presented in this essay, a historiography of ideas and cultures, frames selected writings by Coleman as an environmental philosophy. This essay is built qualitatively around the themes of nature, consumption, and conservation, epistemology, ethics, policy, and evolution. Coleman's environmental philosophy provides an opening for music educators to begin teaching and learning for eco-literacy through music. Okay, so I'm going to begin. The 21st century has been defined by ecological crises. The UNESCO Earth Charter, conceived and written between 1987 and 2000, begins, quote, "We stand at a critical moment in Earth history, a time when humanity must choose its future. Towards this end, it is imperative that we, the peoples of Earth, declare our responsibility to one another, to the greater community of life, and to future generations." End quote. As peoples of Earth, an increasing number of music educators have called for the field of music education to recognize its distinctive responsibilities in this regard. Shevock and Jorgensen, Koza, Lafontaneskia. Okay. Responsibilities that have recently been institutionalized in the Mayday Group's Action Ideal 9. In this essay, I consider how the work of Satis Coleman, who lived from 1878 to 1961, can inform an environmental philosophy for music education. Coleman, in the first half of the 20th century, was a well-known and influential music educator whose ideas were largely ignored during the second half of the 20th century, the era of music education as aesthetic education. Coleman has been rediscovered, however, especially since the 1990s. We got Boston's dissertation, Shevock 2015, Southcott 1990 and 2009, and then Volk 1996. Coinciding with the increase in praxial ideas in music education, the praxial turn, representing a turn away from music education as aesthetic education, according to Scott Goebel, 2010. In her induction into the NAFME Hall of Fame in 2010, Coleman was recognized as having promoted music education for its ability to lead children to relate to music to other subjects, such as history, geography, and the study of natural resources. Coleman recommended that music teachers teach a deep understanding for the music of nature. Environmental philosophy may be understood, then, as one part of her overall music education philosophy, which overlapped with spiritual, scientific, and pedagogical concerns. To clarify environmental aspects of Coleman's music education philosophy, I read environmental and scientific ideas of the early 20th centuries, when the bulk of Coleman's work was written. Current environmental philosophy, progressive education, and the move towards music education as aesthetic education, and more recently the praxial turn, provide additional context. Her philosophy included important aspects of nature and society, and was of consequence for music educators' roles in consumption. She discussed epistemological, ethical, and policy issues in an integrated manner. She was, however, influenced by Darwinian evolutionary thinking and social theory. In this essay, I situate Coleman's music education philosophy in a context of how teachers might increase students' eco-literacy through music education. What I offer here, then, is an intellectual history. Intellectual history and the closely related discipline, history of philosophy, can contextualize ideas such as Coleman's, clarifying the thoughts and ideas of other thinkers at the time, and may inform current practice by recognizing how previous eras' philosophies connect to current understandings. Intellectual history may be defined simply as a historiography of ideas and thinkers. Historian Richard Watmore observed, "The intellectual historian has to start with words. Ideas are social forces. They may be shaped by other forces, but they themselves, in turn, always influence the human world." Watmore argued that philosophies are not always explicit or systematic. Rather, everyday knowledge in history provides an opportunity for analysis of ideas as philosophy. Next section, Satis Coleman. Coleman first taught music at a rural school in Texas, next in Washington, D.C., and then in New York City at Lincoln Lab School from 1920 to 1942, and Teachers College, Columbia University. She taught summer sessions for Teachers College 1925 to 1942, where she earned undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees. Over the course of her career, several major publishers issued her pedagogical, historical, and cultural texts, including 2 texts that I consider philosophical. Coleman was considered a model progressive music educator who placed rhythmic elements, developed through bodily action, before melodic and harmonic elements. She was perhaps best known for incorporating simple instrument construction, which included the making of drums before wind and string instruments. Quote from Coleman's 1931 book, "The Greek ideal of simplicity seemed to offer a possible answer, to see if there could be found varying degrees of simplicity to suit the varying levels of children's natural music capacity." End quote. Within instrument families, she seems to have viewed some cultures' instruments as more advanced than others. See image 1. This has been understood as an expression of recapitulation theory, which supports racist views, and which I unpack in this paper in the sections epistemology, ethics, policy, and evolution. And here's Image 1, Four Stages of Our Development of the Lyre, from a 1922 book. Music, conceived as singing, dancing, instrument making, and playing, and composing, represents means for Coleman's music education philosophy. Coleman's aims were interdisciplinary, called correlation in the early 20th century. Quote from Coleman again: "The making and the manipulation of simple instruments tends to arouse interest in the physics of sound and in other scientific matters." End quote. In correlation theory, music educators taught students to recognize the correlations between music and other school subjects, such as mathematics, science, and geography. Satis Coleman referred to correlation in regard to the construction of primitive instruments such as pipes and drums in the music class. She contended that such an activity carried the child beyond the mere practice of instrument making and led him into the physics of sound as well as the manual arts. It further directed the children toward the history of many different peoples, their methods of making musical instruments, and also toward world geography and knowledge of natural resources. Such training contributed toward a broader education. This is what today we call interdisciplinarity. Since ecology is about relationships, correlation, the integration of various school subjects seems like a natural ally to ecology, which analyzes the interconnections of beings in an ecosystem. Next section, we're up to page 178. Philosophy. Coleman understood her work as a philosophy of music education rather than a method or a system. And here's a 1927 quote from Coleman: "The type of work here described is not a method or system. It is rather a point of view, an attitude, a philosophy, if you please, of music education, which attaches great importance to the teaching of music to children, but is much more concerned with the growth of children. It stands for experiences that not only develop the child's musical sense, but also stimulate adventure and discovery in all fields related to music, that make use of the constructive tendencies of children to enhance their interest, knowledge, and skill, that lead to free and original self-expression with both hands and mind, offering all children, whether talented or not, the opportunity to share in joyous creative experiences that lead to habits of creative work." End quote. I have another long quote here too. She seemed to recognize the importance of using the phrase philosophy of music education by inserting the clause, "if you please." Few, if any, music education writers at the time put forth an explicit philosophy of music education, and Coleman may be unique in this regard. Music education philosophers often begin by defining music, and Coleman similarly felt defining music in relationship to education was important. And here's a quote from her 1925 book: "In considering the music education of young children, I like to think of the word music in its old and original sense. You will recall it is a Greek term, musik, meaning the activities of the muses, and this included all the Greek arts that involved sound or motion, with nothing static as an outcome. Dancing, song, pantomime, rhythmic language, even in tragedy and in the reciting of history, instrumental sounds, everything temporal and rhythmic was music. All these things are by nature so closely bound together by the rhythmic element that it is difficult to isolate one from the other, and a pity to attempt it in the early music experiences of children." Oh, that's such a great quote. End quote. Even today, that would be radical, right? And that's 1925, 100 years ago. Continuing on. From the perspective of intellectual history, her scholarship may be considered philosophy, even if it does not meet specific criteria for contemporary philosophical discourse. Rather than systematic argument, She used storytelling to support her ideas and critiques. Storytelling, as Coleman utilized it, is similar to Plato's dialogues, artistic representations of ideas, especially the early Socratic dialogues that end in aporia, rather than making positive claims. In Coleman's philosophy, the purpose of education was to enhance student happiness by fulfilling the natural desire to make things. Learning was accomplished by doing, not just by listening, which included singing, dancing, and making and improvising on homemade instruments. Coleman earned her PhD in educational psychology in 1931 in Columbia University's Department of Philosophy, and her dissertation references philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle, anthropologists including Franz Boas, and music historians. She did not, however, reference psychologists in her dissertation, nor did she reference John Dewey, although her writings aligned well with Dewey's philosophy. See Southcott's 2009 article. In a later work, Coleman referred to Dewey's idea of interest, and this is a quote from her 1939 book. They may force him to sit at the piano and go through the motions of practice, but they cannot force him into learning anything. John Dewey, in his book Interest and Effort in Education, many years ago discussed this principle of learning. End quote. She thought a general and natural music education was appropriate for everybody, and that students should be free to follow their interests, even when that meant they left music study to follow other interests. Important to this essay, Coleman's writing can be read to provide an environmental philosophy, ideas that are rather atypical within music education. And stop there. We'll pick back up on page 179, Environmental Philosophy. Have a great day.